Are we good?
You're yeah, we good. We live.
Okay.
Back
Uh,
again.
all right. Let's do this. Scientific method. I honestly can't remember why we decided to start off with that topic, but you mind if I just riff a little bit and then we'll see where we go from there?
I can give you the note that started it if you want me to before you read.
Send it.
So I brought up the point that when you pay attention to the scientific method and how hypotheses are placed, you can almost prove anything is true within the right parameters. And so we got into this conversation about okay, so what is a fact?
I got it. Okay.
You can
Yes.
kind of rip from
Thank you. Thank you.
there.
Okay. So the layperson would consider a fact as something real, as something true, as something absolute. And that conceptualization is very useful because it makes the world seem as if it is stable and orderly and predictable. And we like the world to be in low entropy states. When I was in my master's program, there was a discussion in a class about how religion and science could or couldn't be reconciled. And one student said that religion is the realm of speculation and opinion, whereas science is the realm of absolute fact, essentially. And I think that's a big mistake, man. Essentially, for the reason that you just pointed out, the process of conducting science does not necessarily give you absolute truth. What it does is it gives you a set of conditions under which some outcome is reasonably predictable. And that's very
Plausible
different.
maybe.
Plausible. And that's very different. That's very, very different. And science itself is predicated on assumptions of faith. They're predicated on assumption, or the process of science is predicated on philosophical axioms. And so if you don't believe those presuppositions first, you can't conduct science. And so one of the axioms, for example, is that reality has an order. The thing is, if you define order as whatever, something stable, permanent, predictive, or predictable, well, as you are looking into the world, there's evidence for and against that claim. And so you can't prove the validity of that claim or the invalidity of that claim. But in order to conduct science, what are you doing? You're asking a question, you're positing a hypothesis, you're running an experiment, and then you're analyzing the results, right? In relation to the hypothesis. But in order for the, let's say, enduring process of science in humanity to persist over hundreds of years, we have to assume that there's some stability to the world. Like we have to assume that our laws, as we have tried to establish them, aren't shifting from day to day. So that's one little riff.
Yeah, and I think that was my biggest thing when I had that conversation. I had that thought. I was like, even when in school, bro, when you were in science class and they started explaining to you, okay, so this is your hypothesis, this is scientific method, this is how you determine if something's a fact. I'm like, so you mean to tell me that something's only things that we consider facts are only facts within the parameters of certain constants? So this is only true if these things don't change, but these things do change in reality. So what are we really observing here and what are we considering fact? And I'm not saying that the things that we have and information that science has gathered isn't true, but when you start seeing things like, I don't know if you've seen how Terrence Howard is moving through the scientific community, there's like to believe that your method and the solutions that science have so far, the only ways to look at things is extremely limiting. You know what I'm saying? And it's keeping us from really understanding the other factors. And what I look at a lot of times when you see like in metaphysical circles, they always say, well, science has stuck to straight lines. they don't really properly analyze how curved numbers and information work. Like, we do have trigonometry and geometry and the study of shapes and things in that nature, but the numbers are always rounded in a way to fit straight lines. And reality doesn't really always build with straight lines. So how do we equate for that difference? The things that we average out of our mathematics, there's a gap there in the actuality of what's going on compared to that. And I just feel like I didn't even know like how far we could get into this, but there's so much room to have that conversation when we talk about like even like the subject and object relationship. Our idea of what's fact is very far from the reality of it. And so a lot of the claims that we make in our observation of the objective reality um shouldn't be so hardly attached to. You know what I'm saying? That's why I'm so big on ego death and non-attachment, because it's like a wise man knows nothing. A wise man knows that even the things that we believe we figured out, we only seeing a part of the picture. That's why that quote means so much to me, because even with all the information we have, we're still not accurate at all.
Yeah, and a big part of that is the question of accurate to what, and this is where things get really, really complex. Basically, part of what we are saying is that facts without an interpretive context are meaningless. Like, I don't even know what that would be, right? Also, what comes to mind is this notion of an is ought problem. I think it was posited by David Humes. I can't remember his last name, but he was a philosopher and he was an empiricist, I believe. And he said that you can't derive an ought from an is. And an is how the world is. It's a description of the world. It's supposed to be a set of facts. And he made the claim that you can't figure out how to act just because I give you a set of facts, which is very interesting. And it could be something as simple as like, okay, well, what is this? You could say that this is a cup. Well, what do you do with the cup? Like, what's the ought? What ought I do with this cup? Well, I can drink from it. Well, there's nothing in the is, the objective description of the cup, that tells me that I should drink from it, right? The ought is something that I bring to the table. There's a context. I'm thirsty. I'm a human being. I'm a human being that has the ability to grip and to drink, right? None of that is in the cup. And so that's kind of another, I guess, idea that's helpful to think about when trying to understand the proper place of science as not, let's say, the arbiter of ultimate truth, but as one epistemology, as one way of getting to know the world. And that is very helpful, right? Because if we assume a subject object dichotomy, it's very helpful for all of us to, again, establish some idea of a shared world, of an objective world. Because once we establish the shared world, we don't have to talk about it anymore. We already agree on all of those things, and then we only have to focus on those things that we disagree about. Uh, I'm kind of ranting at this point, but here's another thing I'll say. Once you have a set of facts, one question becomes, what is the proper context that you should use to interpret those facts? And part of the answer to that question is, well, what are you trying to do? You know, and so that's why science needs ethics. That's another thing to think about.
Definitely. I think that's the interesting conversation is like, and so the whole part of that for me, a lot of the times is people are like, how are you so nonchalant? How are you so able to jump topics? Is another thing that we talk about is like, I just don't have the attachment to those things being the absolute reality. So I'm willing to bend them a little bit more in ways that just may be possible. Just to see, like, all right, so if we connect these dots and we try to make something out of it, does it work? Does it line up? Does it make sense? Yeah, it does. It seems to operate and it seems to work within the confines of the rules of this reality. You know what I'm saying? And for me, it's just understanding that a lot of times we talk about like the topic of like the junk DNA that we have. and how, okay, so this junk DNA is just things that we don't understand within the paradigm of which we think. So if we stepped outside of those paradigms, what could we learn about what's still there? And I think sometimes, because of how many lines science has drawn to make the findings that they have stick, we've been limited on what else we could discover as humanity because of those limitations. So I think we're coming to a point with AI where we're going to be able to start breaking some of those limitations that science has put in place, because we're just able to prove that so much of it just doesn't work, and we'll have to rework it at some level anyway.
Yeah, and to try to steelman the case for science, or to give some due credit to science too, you could almost make a distinction between, let's say, science and dogmatism. Like, Carl Jung actually spoke about this. He criticized a very specific kind of science. Many people say that he is a mystic and that he is unscientific, but I think that's because they misunderstand what he was trying to convey. So, Aristotle, Greek philosopher, he posited that there are four kinds of causation: there's material, efficient, formal, and final. Material, what's something made of? Efficient, what are the cause and effect steps that lead up to whatever the phenomenon is that you're discussing? Formal, what is the overall shape or pattern that makes up the existence of that phenomenon? And then final is the goal, like what is the purpose of that phenomenon? And so I think the science that we are criticizing could be thought of as a reductive, materialist science. It doesn't take into account all of those explanatory factors or all of those causations. And Jung was saying that we need a more holistic science that tries to, that doesn't only focus on the material and efficient causations, but also looks at the overall patterns of life. It also looks at the intentions and the purpose and the goals of not just, excuse me, human beings, but whatever it is that's trying to be studied scientifically. And this is also why I'm very interested in cybernetics, because I think that is a discipline that is attempting to scientifically break out of that kind of materialist, narrow way of viewing the world. So, all that to say that there's obviously a lot of good things that came from and continue to come from the scientific endeavor, but within it, there are, to use your word, more rigid ways of conducting science that we're trying to say aren't very, can be too reductive and rigid, right? And then science as a whole is only one way of viewing the world. You also have many other ways of trying to approach truth, such as intuition or imagination or art or spirituality. So the more lenses that you have, the more paradigms that you have in your toolkit, the better you will be able to navigate this world.
Definitely. And it's, to me, it's just about realizing that, um so even like, so it was something I was talking about today with one of my agents for AI, and it was just like, all right, so there were like 12 scientists that died recently through different means, and then people have been trying to connect it into this conspiracy type of thing. But when you go look at like the sciences that they were studying, and it's like, you know how long people have been talking about nuclear fusion? I'm so interested in like unlimited energy and the potential of nuclear fusion and all of that that Nikola Tesla had going on. And so for me, it's just like, at some level, I just feel like there's a machine at play that wants to keep science in a place that's monetizable. And that it just feels like that there's a limiter there. Like, why haven't we crossed certain lines and had certain findings? And it seems as though there's a system that doesn't want to discredit certain institutions that have made so much out of what they've found in that space, and moving into different spaces and expounding science in a way that's beneficial for greater humanity more so than what's beneficial for the financial structure of society. I feel like there's been a line drawn there that we all kind of see it, whether we see it in the food, whether we see it in science, whether you see it in health. There's a line being drawn on the progression of human society, and it kind of shows it kind of all leads back to what we can prove is useful and what we can't, and the methods that we go about that in, and the time that it takes for those processes to confirm or deny something as being useful.
Interesting. Yeah. The so are you alluding to a conspiracy, or is it, could it also just be our own undoing, um, a more distributed type of failure, or a combination of the two?
I think our inability to work together because of our need to have individual ideas succeed has kept us from being able to properly grow as a society. I think ego and pride and capitalism keeps us from putting the ideas together that would make things work a little faster. That's just my personal opinion though. I'm not a scientist. I'm not in the rooms. I'm not judging people for their success and what they do and how they work. But I just feel like with all of the genius that I do see around, there are a lot of ideas and people that I don't see connected in a way that should, that could just speed things up. And I wonder what's going on in our systems and our thinking and how we work as a community that keeps us from processing things in a way that's um just faster. Like where there's a lot of unnecessary suffering. I see a lot of people crunching the numbers on solutions that aren't being acted on, and what's just keeping us from making those moves when we do have the information that is possible. What's the systems that are keeping it at bay, and how does that operate? Is it just a communications thing or what?
Maybe we can get into that, if you're interested. I had a executive at this uh, corporation I used to work at talk to me about just his views of the world. And this guy is very successful, very close to C-suites, and a part of a Fortune 20 company, like very successful. So he's seen some things. He understands systems. He understands complexity. He understands people. Like he's doing pretty well. And this has stuck with me. He said that we are too rich to have poor people. Basically, is what he
Literally.
said. And you know, to me, I feel like that's similar to what you said, right? There's too much genius for us to not be further along in our journey. I hope I'm summarizing you relatively well. And you couple that with the image of suffering and unnecessary suffering, and that can create this maybe cynicism, for lack of a word, lack of a better word. And that's a pattern that I see a lot in our culture. And yeah, I wonder if I had a phase of my life where I did that too. But one of the things that I try to then think about next is just how extremely complex all of this thing, all everything is that we are doing. Like we. I'm trying to see if I can come up with an example. I mean, I guess at my work, for example, like I sat in on. For those who don't know, I'm a behavior counselor, non-licensed. I work with adults with various mental disabilities and psychiatric conditions. And this nonprofit that I work for has about 40 or so facilities where they take care of these clients. And I sat in on one meeting for one client. It was just like an update to make sure that he's getting the proper care that he needs. There was the mom. There was like three social workers. There was two nurses. There was a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, and then there was different managers for the different facilities that he's at. It's like 15 people to make sure that this one individual is getting the care that he needs. And who knows what the dollar amount on all of the resources and everything that gets poured into him is. And also, who knows how much waste occurs just because of human error and all. And it's so funny, like in that meeting too, there was like an argument that erupted over teams too. And I'm sure you've had you've had things get dramatic over a team's call because someone's in person and then there's a lag in the communication, and so now it's like you're cutting me off, so now I'm just gonna keep talking. It's so much, but I hope hopefully I'm illustrating the point about how there's so much that goes into just the singular elements that make up these institutions and domains. That was one meeting for one person, and we're talking about the mental health space, right? Uh,
I
so I
mean,
guess
I could even say the same thing for my job. Like, I'm working at a job. I work in IT. I do for the data. I work at IT for a college. And say there's a problem, and we all acknowledge that this problem is something that's consistent, and we have a knowledge base of problems that are consistent, and we can all add to it, and we'll all acknowledge a problem, look at it, put in the ticket, and not make a new knowledge base. How long does it take for us to update the system so that you know what I'm saying? And it's like the company sends out an email and tells everybody to join their accounts. Okay, but they can't get into their accounts until they're registered. Why not put that in the email? Why does the error tell them to call us instead of just putting it in the email that you won't be able to get in until you're registered? There's certain systems that just don't make sense. And you think about how many different companies have these systems in place and that are successful businesses and that do well, but they're just not running in a way that decreases the stress on the workers or the customers. You know what I'm saying? Like, how better could we fix these systems? And how many of these systems are in place in scientific institutions that aren't properly managing data, that aren't doing this or that? You know what I'm saying? Like, how much human error is really going on in our society?
right, right. And then you get some people who say, well, all of our systems need uh, updating, so much so that we need a revolution, and we should just burn it to the ground and start from scratch because that would be easier. I know you're not saying that, but like, I it's hard for me
I think it
to
should
get
burn a
these,
bit.
but and it's like a phoenix, right? Have you watched you watch Harry Potter?
Yes.
Harry Potter, right? It's a phoenix, right? What in the Chamber of
Mm-hmm.
Secrets? Oh, I'm sure the
Yeah.
phoenix is in a few other books, but like the idea of a phoenix is very cool, right? Eternal rebirth. At some point you grow to a certain threshold where some aspects or parts of you needs to be left behind to make room for more growth. And one dialogue that humanity maybe is constantly having is what is the appropriate rate of burning? What is the
I
appropriate
think
rate of growth?
I think we're at a point now where we are burning. Like I think that's the conversation that we're having is that society is kind of at this point we've burnt all the lines of what we agreed upon, whether it was this is what it is and what it isn't. Like we were talking about in the last conversation, the real common sense agreed points are kind of gone. And so with those points being gone, we're kind of at a point now where it's like, okay, so how do we get the phoenix out of the ashes? How do we put this all back together in a way that allows us to fly and rise and be successful and thrive as a society?
I think it's happening. I think that was reflected in Trump getting elected both times. I think that in part Trump's victories, particularly this last time, was the culmination of many Americans saying we've been feeling a lot of chaos lately. We've been feeling a lot of disorganization, a lot of a lack of a fire extinguisher, for lack of better terms. Like there's been like we're looking for the phoenix. Like we need we're tired of the burning process, and now we want something stable to hold on to. And for that's obviously like one take, and that's for better or worse how one part of the culture feels. But in other domains, I would say in the work that we are partially trying to do with the hero's journey and the archetypes, it's like once you stray, it's as if you stray too far from the collective unconscious, and then maybe like Icarus flying too high to the sun, then at some point that you catch on fire, and you have to resubmerge and refigure out the pillars of order that can stabilize you and can rejuvenate you after you've gone through the fire. But of course, you have to go through the fire. So I'm not trying to say that it should only be order, and that we should just all remain in some sort of archetypal nature. But I think that that's how we characterize our current times. There's a longing for order, and I would also say there's a longing for meaning, and I think those two are very similar, right? I think that meaning can be found in the optimal balancing of chaos and order, but it's a dynamic, right? So moving away from pathological chaos towards order is meaningful, the same way that moving from pathological order, which could be like boredom, is meaningful because now you're finding something novel to learn that forces you to actually grow, and then that burning actually feels pretty good. And so yeah, I think I would say that we are moving away from pathological chaos and then moving towards order. And then of course, as the pendulum swings, as you mentioned in the last video, we're going to go too far that direction, then we got to come back. So that's what I think.
I definitely, and that's like you said, it's all about that churning and that fight that we're doing. And so, like, even with that, I see you. We even see it what's going on with, like, I know the other topic we said we're gonna talk about was relationships. I don't know if you've been seeing what's going on like on the social media side of relationships or what, but it's been interesting watching humanity try to balance the masculine and feminine dynamic in a way that's beneficial to everyone. There's a lot of clear pain and trauma that people deal with around the topic, especially when we comment on other people's relationships in the way that we do. Um, I've been bantering a bit on social media, just trying to get a gauge on how everybody's feeling about different things. But that'll be something we can maybe get into as far as like trying to understand how these different dynamics are changed and how these lines breaking down and being rebuilt.
Yeah, sure. So what's your sense of how uh, men and women are dealing with each other?
Bro, I've seen some interesting things on social media this week. I've seen everything from a group of black women encouraging encouraging white men to kill black men. I've seen everything about the Megan Stallion and Klay Thompson conversation about how women feel one way or another about that situation. And then you see this side of people that just seem more like regular people. I'm convinced that at this point that there's a side of propaganda and news that goes into social media that makes certain ideas just seem more important than what they actually are. I see a large group of people that are just saying like, yeah, I see a large group of people that are just sincerely looking for love and just trying to be patient about it despite the hailstorm that is social media. And then I see a lot of people that are extremely affected by social media and how they're portraying the dating pool and what relationships are. And I think it's just all about what you choose to believe in and what you choose to have patience for. Um, there's always been mm, bullshit going on. It's your ability to find something that is not a part of the shit show, or that people that aren't too involved in what's going on. I think social media and reality TV has kept us from having a real scope of what relationships are, because so many people don't come from households that have stable relationships. There's just not, people don't have a good perception of what that looks like and how that works.
Yeah, I I miss great TV shows like The Cosby Show, Fresh Prince of Bel Air, Family Matters, Full House. That's how I. That's one of the ways that I got my understanding of what a family was like, and the good and the bad and the ugly. But I wonder if there are still good shows like that out there. But I don't know.
They try to redo the Fresh Prince. I haven't watched all of it. It's cool though. But I mean, I think that's the interesting thing is like what, and then like, so I mean, I know when we talk about a relationship thing, we talk about it more in just outside of the romantic sense, but even more so in just like the person to person relationships and how people communicate as well, and how that dynamic works. And with COVID happening, with technology in the state that it is, how are people building relationships? How are people communicating? How are people grouping together? There's so many different layers of it that seem harder than what it used to be, I guess is the best way of phrasing that.
I'm also getting older, man, so I'm getting out of touch with like how these
I swear.
youngsters are. I don't know how young people are. Young people. I'm 31, but like let me just say this: I feel very happy to be married and out of the game. Like I'm so I'm so excited, man. Like I can't. I talk to my wife a lot about just her peers who are professional women between the ages of 30 and 35, and many of them do say that they have trouble finding men. And there are some biological generalizations that could help us frame the picture. So women, generally speaking, are, is it neotness? Is that the word? I think that's the word.
Yeah,
um,
you gonna make me look that up because I don't even know what you just said.
I think the word is, I think it's neoteny. I think that when it comes to a social status hierarchy, women date across and up a status hierarchy, whereas men are the opposite. They date across and down a status hierarchy. And so, again, generally speaking, for women, status is more important. And we assume a single status hierarchy because there are some animals that have separate, completely separate status hierarchies for females and males. And humans used to have that too, but now let's say it's merged, right? Chimpanzees are very similar too, but anyway, so status is more important for women when they're looking for a mate, and let's define status just simply in terms of money or potential to make money. Women are more educated now. Women are more in the workforce. It's easier for them to um, be self-sustainable. And so, what does that mean? Well, that means that there are less viable candidates for them, and in some sense, it means that. What does that mean for men? My arithmetic isn't working right now. Part of what ends up happening is that there are many women chasing fewer and fewer men, and that leaves a lot of men and a lot of women actually unhappy to say in some senses. And something that I've thought about is it's something we've kind of discussed before, is ensuring that, let me just say this, I think it would be useful for us to clarify what is good for men and women to seek in one another. Like there's some overlap, right? Like men and women want good people as a partner, right? You want you to be a good person. So we can sit here and talk about what it is to be a good person that would make sense for both men and women. But I do think that there are different things that men want in women compared to what women want in men. Let me pause there to see if you have any thoughts first.
Yeah, I think what we're really getting at here is understanding that what we consider the old time masculine and feminine dynamics don't really work well for the social or financial climate of this market. Like every man does protecting and provide. So this is where I bounce. I believe that a man's role is to protect and provide, but protecting and providing doesn't always have to be strictly I can fight and I got a lot of money. Like there's a lot of ways that a man can protect and provide for his household, and that's all determined by the man and his ability to one acquiesce with his responsibilities and then figure out who he is and how to properly allocate those resources and those responsibilities in the way that he needs to. And then so for a woman, to me the idea is to multiply what's being protected and provided for, whether it's a house, whether it's the money, whether it's the kids. Their job is to be able to and multiply and um feed or give into or feed into these things in order for them to grow. So a garden, a house, kids, whatever. Their job is to take whatever they have and multiply it. That's just kind of how I look at it. But those roles kind of come from a natural order type of thing to me. And I don't believe there's any one way for those things to be filled out. Like it's not necessarily that you have to play those roles. Those are just the roles that are in balance with the order of things. I believe that there are feminine men, and I believe that there are masculine women, and your ability to realize who your partner is and what role they play in that dynamic is really more so of the thing that we don't really do well. We don't acknowledge that, okay, if like chicks that are a little bit more bossy, they do a little bit better at running things than some men do. You might want to pick a man that's a little bit more feminine. He might be more willing to let you lead. That's not a bad thing. It's just the dynamic that you all have in relationships. And I don't believe we're open enough to those different dynamics. Just like some men may be more masculine and more feminine, and the female needs to be more, and the female needs to realize, like, hey, I don't have to be masculine anymore. Like you said, and we're in a space where more feminine are being demanded to be masculine, and they're not able to turn that off to allow someone in that can facilitate that extra bit of work that they've had to put in just to sustain until they got in this situation. You feel what I'm saying? And the same thing goes for men and being able to allow more softness in and not always demand the same work ethic from every female that they deal with because everybody's different. And so like understanding how to get to know yourself helps you get to know other people in that dynamic. And that's kind of where I feel like there's a lot of work to be done in society and how we perceive those lines. And like you said, a lot of the conversations I have are like, all right, these things are too rigid. There's room for there to be more options without you having to just chop everything up. Like just let it be space for things to flow.
So we might disagree here a little bit. So one of the ways you can think of, let's say, masculine and feminine roles, you can associate them with the stereotypical jobs of the man is the engineer and then the woman is the nurse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man is the rational uh, abstractor who uses reason to create things to order the world essentially, and then you have the woman who is the nourisher, the rejuvenator, the caretaker, right? What's interesting is that in what you can do from a psychometric standpoint is measure the amount of egalitarianness in different countries, so how free countries are. And you can also get a measure of the proportion of female nurses to male nurses and female engineers to male engineers. And you could also do that with personality differences and many other different things, but let's just focus on the jobs for now. The more free a country is, the more that those ratios split. And so the less social conformity pressures there are, the more that men go to what we might consider their natural niche in terms of, let's say, engineers, and the more that women become nurses. I think with teachers it's very similar too. And so I think that to some degree, where we see an overlap or a shift in the traditional roles, I think part of that is culturally created and not a natural thing. You know, I and then just anecdotally, I have many female friends who, from such a young age, they were told like, okay, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna go to college, then you're gonna go to graduate school, then you're gonna like kids come later, career comes first, right? And I have one friend or a former boss. You know, she's in her 50s, and essentially like she bought into that, and she waited too long, and she couldn't have kids, and now she pushed kids off, and when she then tried, she couldn't, and now she doesn't have kids, and it just crushes her. And it does go back to your point about the importance of understanding yourself and being able to separate what you want from what society tells you you should want. And that's not an easy thing, right? Because we're always playing this dance of being, of wearing our persona, of being socially acceptable and conforming to society, because that's part of what it takes to be a civilized person, right? Like we said in our last video, you don't want to only exist in your own subjective experience. You have to take what other people say into account. You're embedded in a culture where there's media and there's movies and there's books and there's literature telling you X, Y, and Z ideas, and you have to learn how to take what you think is useful, but to discard what you think will hurt you. But again, and another point that you made, many men and women or boys and girls didn't have, let's say, matriarchs and patriarchs in their family to help them learn themselves and help them understand that there are some things that culture is saying that you don't need to pay attention to. You know, there are many broken families out there where these children didn't have good male and female role models to kind of help them balance, let's say, their natural instincts with being a social individual. So I think there's a mess. Let me just say that. I think there's a lot.
Definitely, I think that mess. I think that's what we're kind of looking at. I think one thing that I really like about where we're at in society right now is we have the tools to kind of look at this mess and begin to organize it. Like there's a potential here for us to kind of, if we began to communicate effectively, we could organize what we could see as the humans' problems, where the gaps have been the most consistent, and begin to build systems that can ease that transition and that understanding. Um, I think it's odd that we spend time on social media making the problem worse almost and better. It's what I see most of the time. And it's just like, bro, like I I would just love to get online and actually have conversations that we're building community, that we're building better understanding. And a lot of times, like even the conversations with people that I feel like this should be an easy conversation, you'll realize where boundaries lie in people's logic that you just didn't know were there. And the ability to communicate through those is always interesting.
Yeah, we could pick up on social media there too, because that is such a travesty, dude. I can't. Okay, so first of all, I'm a big personal responsibility guy. You know, like if you are getting sucked into social media, it's on you to turn it off. All right. If you're going to dabble in the brain rot of Instagram, you have to understand that it's brain rot. It's similar to I think there's this libertarian commentator named Dave Smith that conceptualized it as it's like fast food. Okay, like I'm not saying we shouldn't have fast food, and I'm not saying that fast food companies shouldn't be making fast food, but I think people should know and be aware of the fact that it's poison. Like it's just you just shouldn't eat it. You can, but you shouldn't eat it. And I think that's really stuck in my mind. Like you have an information diet. Okay, now you have to be more aware of what you're consuming, and you have to be more deliberate about making a, a system of information intake that is actually beneficial, not just for you but for everyone around you, and for the long term, not the short term. And that's a lot more responsibility on the individuals, and that's another tension, right? That's another tension we have. It's like with all this, with the multiplicity that we have, all of these, all of the information, all of the complexity, the onus is on the individual to the onus is more on the individual to sort through that chaos. One alternative that I see people talking about, though, is like, well, we should centralize all of that authority so that way there's one person or one committee that's deciding what information is good or bad. And it's like, look, it would be a lot more streamlined. Like when there was only three. Now, yeah, I'm absolutely against that too. Just to steel man the argument, it's like, look, when there were four news stations, everybody was on the same. Now, I don't know. I don't actually know if this is the case. I'm imagining, I'm not that old. But I imagine that when there's, four or five news stations or radio stations, everyone got the same information or relatively the same information. And so there was just less conflict, right? But now that everyone is a journalist because everyone has a phone, it's like you can go get whatever set of facts that you want, taking it back to the beginning of our conversation of trying to figure out, well, what is a fact, you know? So, it, yeah, no, people have to, one, have the motivation to pay more attention to their information diet, and two, they also need to have the knowledge of how to establish when some source of information is credible, or when it isn't. And you can't, one of the things you can do is you can listen to someone try out their ideas and see if it worked or not. But you know a lot of pain can come from that if you listen to someone who you just shouldn't have listened to in the first place. So I don't know. There's got to be
It's a lot
better.
of risk in that.
There's got to be better ways.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing is that I'm in an interesting place of where I would like society to go next. Like I'm so torn on like I just want it to be fun. But then there's
Keep
like this aspect of it
keep
of
talking. I
like
can hear you. Sorry, I just gotta step away one sec. But keep talking.
you're good. There's this aspect of it that's like what happens if society just really gets more chaotic, or do I want it to get more order, and which preference means what? Like for me, when I really think about it, is like, all right, there's a big potential for us to get rid of money and us for to get rid of privacy for unlimited resources and actual trust in society. But it's like we got to get rid of money and privacy for that. And it's like I don't think there's enough of us that are ready for that conversation. And so like you said, what a lot of this is, it becomes a thing where it's like, I don't know if you heard, like in Atlanta they're testing like the world's most policed AI system or some shit now in Atlanta, supposedly, where the cop city thinks implementing some like AI policing system on all the cameras in the city. So there's like, when we start getting into things like that on a national scale, and it's like, all right, we kind of do know what happened. Like your phone, you're gonna record it anyway. Okay, so now it's public data. We all know what happened. We can see it. We can tap into your phone and know what happened where on this corner. We have access to all the mics in everybody's houses. That's everywhere already. So we now have an open source truth. What does that really do? Does that make the world better or worse? I don't fucking know. Like, who knows what comes crawling out and how long it takes for society to adjust to that? And what does that do to our psychiatric state? Does it help us? Does it hinder us? Do we spend 5 or 10 years just figuring out how to get along for the next couple of years because everybody's in everybody's business? Like, what does that look like? So I don't know. I'm just so curious about does more truth and transparency help? Like the big thing with cryptocurrency is that okay, we can track everybody's money, we can know who's money laundering and who's not, and we can just kind of nip all that in the butt. But okay, if all those systems are gone and we clean up everything, what happens next? We don't know. It can be good, it can be bad.
You know, there are a lot of great books that have tried to speculate on what happens
You know what
in
I'm
those
saying?
utopian slash dystopian scenarios. There's a great book, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, that just tried to detail out this society where everything was known by the state, which was all powerful, because essentially anything that is unknown can be anxiety provoking, and anxiety is associated with harm, and we want to reduce like this state wanted to completely eradicate harm. And so it's so interesting, okay, going from the metaphysics to, I guess, the political implications. And so we think of two fundamental metaphysical substrates of reality, right? Order and chaos. Order, predictability, stability, unity. Chaos, multiplicity, diversity, difference, the unknown, potential, freedom, right? Freedom to move. Freedom, like, you can't have freedom without chaos, without
Utopia.
flexibility to move. Exactly. But the thing is, chaos is inevitably, and this is neuroscientifically true, associated with anxiety. And you can think of
Because there's no
trauma.
peace in it. Stability comes from knowing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And so order and chaos, known and unknown, right? And so and also with the unknown is potential, and also with potential and chaos is diversity, right? So now in Brave New World, it's not necessarily that they got rid of diversity, but they had to control exactly how diverse everything is, down to genetically engineering humans to fill certain strata of society. Like that's how far it got, right? Like the state controlled everything. But guess what? There was no suffering. There was no freedom, but there is no suffering. And I think that that's one of the big conversations that's also happening. I think you see, like, for example, with the rise and the appeal of Marxism and socialism, and you look at what's going on in New York with Mamdani, like, there, if suffering is so horrible that you feel that is the most important thing to get rid of it, then you will sacrifice freedom for you will sacrifice freedom and autonomy for safety. And it's like, you can make the argument, right? You can make the argument that, like, well, that's what should happen, right? Because that's what's going on. But the the existential philosophers like Dostoevsky, and to Aldous Huxley's point, the author I was just mentioning, they completely disagree with that. It was just like, no, man, like it's better to this is why I think in the Garden of Eden there's a snake there. Because what does the snake represent? The snake represents anxiety. The snake represents that which lurks in the unknown, in the shadow, right? A dragon is a flying snake. What does a dragon hoard? A dragon hoards gold, or a dragon protects or has a captured virgin, and if you can overcome the dragon, then you get the blessing. And so I think that in this perfect utopia of the Garden of Eden, according to the Judeo-Christian standpoint, it's as if the perfect world isn't one where there's complete safety. It's one where there is the potential for what, death, failure, anxiety. Like, it's like that's what a good world is. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think I have to agree at a certain level because I don't really believe in. So I believe a perfect world is a natural world, and I believe a natural world is chaotic but ordered. Like the order is in the chaos, if that makes sense. Like our need to try to order things on top of what we have is where we kind of go wrong. Like I'll put it this way. So my mindset here is that intuitively there's a range of freedom that we have. And that range of freedom is all within the order that, like I said, so masculine. So we live in a feminine. We live on a feminine. We live on a feminine planet in a masculine system, right? But I believe that if you look at the mysteries, you believe that Sophia's system is a replica of the system that she came from. So the mother's system is a replica of the father's system, which was order. So this is how we get the order behind the chaos that we live in, if that makes sense. So it's almost like understanding that despite us living in a chaotic world, a world where death and everything is allowed, it's still backed by order, if that makes sense. And so the chaos that we're experiencing is within the limits of order. And so I don't believe that we need to reorder it. I guess that's what I'm more so saying, is that if we understood the order behind what we see as chaos, we would understand the chaos for what it is and feel less of a need to rebuild on top of it and more understand how to get in tune with what is. So this is like all about, basically I'm saying that people need to learn to get in tune with nature, because nature is ordered by something that is perfectly ordered. Nature is within the confines of something that is perfectly ordered. So even though it's chaotic within order,
So,
if you understand the structure.
okay, so there are climate change activists who have this view that, well, humans aren't actually natural, and they essentially worship the earth in its natural state, And so there are people who have this view that, well, it would be better for the natural order if human beings didn't exist, because because essentially everything that human beings do interfere with the natural order. Now, you're not saying that, right?
I'm saying that the society in which we interact. So I'm agreeing. I don't agree with that. I agree. So I would preface it this way. I don't believe humanity needs to be destroyed. I believe the way that we interact with nature needs to be reworked entirely.
So, well, you know, how about this, right? Man and woman have their natural elements, right?
Mm.
We kind of spoke about that earlier with the feminine order and the masculine order. Help me reconcile what you're saying in the context of relationships and femininity and masculinity, because to some sense I agree with what you're saying, but I wonder if we're saying the same thing. Like, I think that our cultural systems have pathologized the natural feminine and masculine orders, and I think that pathologization, if it's a word, is what we're seeing in many of the conflicts and tension between the sexes in our culture.
Yes, if to rephrase it a bit, just to make sure I'm understanding, and like you said, we're dialing into this point correctly. What I'm saying is that the way, like you said, for instance, in the relationships, what I believe we're seeing, if you mean by pathologizing the word that you use, are you saying that we've strayed from, we're beginning to argue what is the natural order of things in a way that's unbeneficial to our society? Is that what you're saying?
I'm actually saying that we've associated the natural order with the old traditional rigid ways, and we're so more enlightened now that we can really do whatever we want. That's what I'm saying.
So I believe that the old rigid ways weren't natural.
Like what?
For instance, I don't. So no, let's reestablish what actually I believe went wrong. I believe that we had things. I believe the perception of the old ways was ordered correctly. The way that it was actually being acted it out wasn't. Like if we look at how abusive men were in past and how controlling they were of the feminine. Masculine is supposed to protect the feminine, not dominate it. There's a difference. And so the nuance in that understanding of what those roles were compared to what we were like, old men were abusive, bro. Let's just be honest. We can have a conversation. Masculine has been abusive in society for a while. And our ability to acknowledge our mistaking protecting and providing or being the head of household and not drawing that line on what's abusive behavior has created a very disruptive balance in our society. And not only have we not properly drew that line, but we haven't addressed it in any way that really discourages that kind of behavior. I want to preface that whatever else I say with that is that I do believe that our lack of policing each other in certain situations and allowing certain behaviors to be considered masculine has distorted what masculinity is in the current era. I'll stop there and then you can kind of go from there.
I think I would be interested to look at the evidence for the, I guess, higher rates of abuse, and then depending on how we're defining abuse back then compared to now. I'm completely open to that. I also don't think, I would imagine that men are still pretty bad today. Let's just say
That's
that. So
but
I'm
that's
not
what I'm saying. It
denying.
hasn't been addressed. It's not like it's declining in a way. You
I'm
know what
not.
I'm saying?
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying the existence of oppressive, corrupted men. I would be more so curious about that rate of change over time, and if it was really worse back then than it is now. Um,
It was encouraged back then. I could at least argue there's some guys that be like, all right, bro, you're kind of tripping. Like you're doing too much. Back then there were like parties of like, and we see it still in social media today. So I guess I could say the numbers may not, the numbers would be just a difference here. But the fact is that there is what we're seeing in this feminist movement is a result of completely ignoring a problem in social society. You see what I'm saying? Like what we see as this thing, like I said, and it maybe just be more so. I try not to get overly caught up in what I see on social media as portrayed as the narrative or the timing of things. But when I see certain things displayed at the level that I'm seeing it, it's like, so what is the conversation amongst everybody else? Like, oh, is this really the conversation we're having, or is this just a social media? Is this AI? Because at this point, I need to know. Like, what are we doing? Like, are we really not understanding how relationships work? And I think the bigger thing is like, for me and you, like we're both, I'm cool, bro. Like, I'm not, me and my lady aren't married yet, but I'm cool. Like, bro, I'm perfectly fine where I'm at. But I look outside and I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Like, is it really that bad outside? What are y'all doing? What are we talking about? Do we not understand how dating works? Do we not understand that there's a process that every date person you date isn't gonna? I understand this is topic of like dating for marriage, but like you can just get to know a person and then it cannot work out and that can be okay and y'all can move on and it doesn't have to be so weird and extra dramatic. Like I feel like some people are just making things way too much.
yeah, and this is something I'm not super educated in, and it's on my backlog. But just the history of feminism and the history of the relationship between the sexes, and you could say the same thing with it's a similar pattern with the history of, let's say, the gay rights movement or the history of the civil rights movement. It's like, for example, Thomas Sowell is a famous black economist who wrote about how on many different dimensions when it comes to the black community in America, whether it comes to education, whether it comes to two-parent households, when it comes to wealth, whether it comes to health, whether it comes to job acquisition, the black community was doing really, really well, actually. And by the 50s was on par and in some cases exceeding white counterparts, right? But you still, particularly then going to the 60s, had this narrative that America is just the most racist, like the most horrible country. And then you had, the Civil Rights Movement and Voting Rights Act. And what's interesting is that on those same dimensions, where if you look at the graph, it's so interesting. Thomas Sowell, look up his work. If you look at the graph, you see that we were trending up in a lot of these positive dimensions, or down in the negative ones, however you want to put it. But we were doing better, and then the 60s happens, and then we start going down like this to today. When it comes to crime, when it comes to children born out of wedlock, it's like these are some of these things where I'm over the past few years, I've just become so skeptical over these narratives that come online, or even when I was in school. Like, it's just the norm that, like, yeah, for the past 150 years, men were beating women. For the past 150 years, like, yeah, like, white people were just shooting and lynching black people all the time, and it's like, okay, I'm sure some of that happened, yes, but the narrative, this is again something Jung spoke about, like the one-sidedness of a narrative. There's always two sides to the story, and like even if what you're saying has some truth to it, is it the whole truth? The same thing with nature, right? It's like with the climate activists. It's like, yeah, no, we are devastating the world in many regards, right? But at the same time, we, as God told Adam, are supposed to subdue the environment and put everything in its proper place. That's what man is supposed to do. So we can be great gardeners, you know, and but we still have dominion over it, and so we can have our proper place. And it's definitely not the reverse narrative of nature completely rules over us, but we also don't have to be just like jackasses about it, like mess it up. So there's a balance to all these things that I'm trying. So going back to the feminist movement and relationships from that perspective, like part of the thing that I just try to keep in mind. Again, there's so much reading that I have to do about the actual history of these movements just to understand, like, well, what are the standards, right? Like, what are we fighting for? So look, take we could I'm a little more versed in racial matters, but like, again, there are also rights for women that manifested in the 60s. It's like civil rights movement happens, right? Okay, but essentially, I might butcher this, but it's really simplified, but I'm gonna say it. Okay, but now the goalposts move, right? Now it's not enough that uh, you see this in the shift from the discussion of equality to the discussion of equity, right? Equality is equal opportunity, all right? Everyone, relatively speaking, plays by the same rules, starts at the same starting line. Okay, cool. But now it's equity. What is equity? Equity is not everyone starts at the same starting line. Equity is we actually adjust the starting line based on your privilege or lack thereof, so that way we can get equal outcomes. And you also see how the civil rights movement transitioned out of, say, being led by Dr. King to the Black Power movement. You saw the same thing, I think, decades later with the gay liberation movement. You saw the same thing with the feminist movement, moving from second to third and fourth wave feminism. It's like, so now it's like, I think, and a lot of these movements are fringe aspects of the culture, that are raising these conversations. But the question just becomes like, what do y'all want? What are we when can we get to the point where it's like, all right, it's on you now, like now it's on you, but it's like there has to be continual victims. Okay, all right, let me stop. Let me get off my little box.
No, and I think that's really the point that's so disturbing to me about the state of what's going on in the conversations that are being had. Is just like, all right, at the end of the day, what are we supposed to do? Men are being abusive. Okay, we can accept that. Some men are completely out of pocket. They have absolutely no frame of reference for how to act. Okay, so what do we do for that? Do we put them in jail? Do we kill them all? Is like everybody's saying therapy, but a lot of these men have been in therapy for their whole lives. Doesn't seem to be making much of a difference. So, I just don't think that we're properly rationalizing what rehabilitation looks like in our society. And because we don't have a proper method for rehabilitation, we don't know how to properly deal with issues when we have them.
Well, part of that is also rehabilitation towards what, right? And so we don't have a good goal of what the ideal masculine is. And
I agree with that.
and this is I think we might, I don't know, we might be coming at it from different angles, but I don't disagree with what you just said. Like there's nothing, I don't see anything wrong with, you use the word rehabilitation, but I would just say encouraging men to be better, right? Like what's, there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to have a shared ideal, you know? Like if we're talking about one thing, if we're talking about masculinity, you need a uniting archetypal narrative that is motivating enough for this category of people, right? We're talking about men. We're not talking about, and again to your point earlier, there are different ways to manifest the archetype, right? There are multiple heroes' journeys, right? We're talking about the form, not necessarily the content. But it's why in all the classic Disney movies, the heroes are different. You know, Aladdin is different from Hercules, but they have the same form. Like they go through the same journey and the same process, and their patterns of attention that they bring to bear on the world are very similar, which is why we can tell that they're heroes, right? They sacrifice of themselves. They are brave. They tell the truth. They aren't afraid to stand up and protect others. You know, Hercules does that in a way different way than Aladdin does it, but they still do the same thing. So, but what I see is part of what I see is the dissolution of the grand narrative for both men and women. Like what is the, we are afraid to talk about ideals. We are afraid to talk about ideal masculinity and ideal femininity because you know that necessarily
You have to live
is,
up to
you have to live up to it exactly, and no one wants to
it.
do that. Tay,
No
nobody
one
wants to
wants to
do
have the
that.
conversation that these are the ideals that we should be fighting for, and I'm this far from it. So you don't want to set a marker that you haven't already surpassed, because then what are you? What are everyone's scared to set the marker higher than what they feel like they can achieve. And some people are working hard enough already and they're nowhere close. But you have to be able to admit that and be willing to make the adjustments. This is where accountability comes in. And we live in a society that rather lower the goalpost than be accountable. That's the issue a lot of the time.
And, and I try to, I also see in terms of lowering the goalpost, let's just destroy the system because it's not working for me. Now, it's, you have to be discerning, right? Because like we spoke about, excuse me, optimal systems are like a phoenix. Like yes, there is some change and burning that needs to occur, but is the burning that you are advocating for so that the system can be resurrected anew, or is it so that way you don't have to deal with it and you don't have to learn and you don't have to grow? And you know the,
Is it you or the system that needs to burn is the question a lot of the time.
that is it. And many people, for all the reasons you just said, many people will rather tear down their ideal or tear down something else so that way they don't have to change. And this goes back, I think this is why the story of Cain and Abel is what the third story in Genesis, right? You know, Abel receives the blessing, Cain doesn't. God tells Cain, bro, if you just did what you're supposed to do, you'd be all right. And Cain is like, nah, fuck that. And
I
he
want it.
tears.
I'm gonna get it in blood. Literally, I'm gonna get
Yeah.
it in blood, and that's where you see that, and that's why you understand that that is such an instrumental lesson in our psyche, because it's like those are the two personalities. You have the person that will genuinely get there just based off of him just not really trying too hard. It's kind of his intention to be a good person, and then you have that person that really doesn't really want to be a good person, that has no desire to be a good person, but they want the approval of the system. and they'll go about as far as they feel like they need to get it, even if it's outside of the rules and constraints of that system. That's what we talk about when we talk about the idea of evil. Like there's a conversation of the Canaanite mindset, and this idea of the people that come from, like you said, that lower 1 to 5% are is the rise and fall of that mindset or that subconscious reality within the human design that does resist with envy, jealousy. These lower natures are a part of our subconscious mind. It's a part of the reality of who we are and our ability to create mindsets that properly balance that, dictate that. And just to kind of bring the whole conversation full circle, I believe we're in a time in society where our social norms don't properly balance those lower natures. They encourage them in a way that's not really beneficial to us. And what we're seeing is an uprising of these lower natures as if they're beneficial personality traits. And it's causing a strange balance in our communication and how we interact with each other because we're leading with natures that we normally would either be ashamed of or would just handle with more tact.
You see, and that's another man. Okay, okay. So my bias is obviously coming out here. Like I am of the opinion that the past few decades, men have been masculinity has been under assault. I don't see
Agreed.
nearly the same degree of devastation being re- wrought inflicted on femininity other than from other feminists. Like I like that's a I, it's hard to talk about masculinity without talking about femininity, but I'm just gonna start. I'm just gonna say it. All right. Look, even in psychology, there are I don't know if they've been reformed, but this is like a year ago. I checked the American Psychological Association, right? The top organization for all of psychology in America. They have provided guidelines for how to deal with men and boys and how to deal with girls and women. And in the guidelines for men, they talk about toxic masculinity. They don't even mention toxic femininity in the other set of guidelines. And that's just one example of like the the asymmetry that is manifesting here. And okay, why did I start going down this path? Um, you brought up what did you bring up before I started talking? Would you say something about the social order or
I brought up. I went on a bit of a rant. Where was I stop? Where did I stop at that you cut in at?
it's okay. Let me try to pick it up if I can. Yeah, so I view men as being more decimated and demoralized compared to women, which affects women, by the way, right? Because you know, I think that Beauty and the Beast is one archetypal narrative, particularly for women. I think that women want a beast that they tame. You know, that's a beast for them that contends with the world, but is like great with her. You know, like
Yeah, they want somebody that chooses to submit to them. There's an
yeah,
aspect of that.
yeah, no, absolutely. But you can't say that. You know, like you can't. Our culture doesn't understand that, doesn't agree with that. And when we say our culture, right, like that's it's such a generalization, right? Because there are obviously still many movies that portray the traditional masculine that do well, right? There's still many movies that portray the um, traditional feminine and they work. And so it's a ebb and flow. You know, I don't think I'm not trying to be too catastrophizing about this, but at the same time, it, you only have to push a certain fringe of society to the limit before they try to tip the whole thing over. You know, and so that's kind of where I see it. And yeah, man, I think many of our stories got it right when it comes to portraying the ideal masculine and the ideal feminine. And I think part of the work is just reintroducing those stories to uh, our culture and encouraging it and incentivizing it. And oh, there. Okay, one. Okay, I got it. I got it. This is what I was gonna say. You mentioned shame. Basically, you mentioned lower order elements of our personality that are actually encouraged, and not only are they encouraged through social media, through things like um, reinforcing impulsivity, but we don't shame people anymore. You can't shame people anymore. It's not good to shame people.
We can't even make fun of people like as a joke. Like I really just can't casually tell you you look goofy, and it doesn't. I miss Joning. We don't Jone no more. They will cancel you for joning on somebody.
And you know, this is something that I think the black community does amazingly. I think that the black community, I can criticize black people all day. I also think that we are leaders in many aspects of detecting bullshit and just like, all right, like that's some white people shit. Like it's so funny, right? Like it's when it comes to the Boondocks, when it comes to all of these different artistic endeavors and domains that express like just when the broader culture of America strays too far from, let's say, a pragmatic reality. It's like, all right, it's kind of like
You're doing too much.
you do
We
too much.
we've done a great job of minding our business about certain topics, but the downside of that is that the things that we do bicker over are the dumbest things sometimes, bro. It's like why do we even care about this topic? Like we could find anything to be passionate about, and we just care about sports and celebrity business.
You know,
Like why? Why is that the topic of our community most of the time?
there's, maybe that could be another conversation. That could
That's
be
a whole
good. I
conversation
think
of
I
like
need
why.
to. I gotta prepare more for that one, but yeah, yeah. It's what is the value hierarchy of the black community? What is it now, and what it should be? How did it get to where it is now? That could be a good question because everyone will talk about slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and the convict lease, yeah, system, the prison system, and um, I had a professor tell me that America is fundamentally racist, and my response upon reflection was, well, it's not more racist than any other country at that time. Like, is that like everyone was doing it? Okay, but after you get those realities out of the way, right? Because let me say yes, and how did we get here, and what's a vision for the future? I think that could be a reasonable framing for another good discussion because I have many thoughts that I think my first Substack essay was Dear Black People. It was like a 5,000 word essay on like why are we so unhealthy and why are men and women like why is there so much there appears to be more of a tension between black men and black women compared to other races and like why is fatherlessness such a epidemic like what is going on and so yes, I am very interested in talking about that. Just to sum up.
Because like you said, there's so many different paths to that, and I guess for me, I everyone goes the systematic oppression route with that conversation, and I'm just like, yeah, can we have an accountability conversation about the people that was actually in the room that grew up in these households and seeing what was going on and what was and wasn't being done for the betterment of everybody? Did we try as hard as we could have for real? And why didn't we? And if it was all a mental thing, how do we fix it now? What does that look like? So that's just where I kind of like a way to frame that if we get into it for the next conversation. But yeah, what does that look like? What do we actually need to do now? What is the actionables? Like what could we do to steer this ship in a better direction?
I would also, I wonder if you'd also be interested in just talking about race as a topic in itself, because I do think that's interesting. Like, I don't, and the cultural implications of it. It's like, I know to many people, I don't look black. So, like, am I black? You know, like, can I, like, I don't know. Like, can I have this conversation with you? I don't know. We're going to figure it out, I guess.
I mean, I consider you black like, just off of multiple conversations and how you handle yourself and different things. But I don't. I guess that's the thing. Was like I don't really. That's a strange conversation for me because like I'm in this place now where it's like, bro. First of all, everybody's human. To debate blackness, if we're gonna go genetics, are we gonna go like habits? Are we just talking about like experiences? There's a lot of people that don't look black that got black experiences by Americans' definitions of black experiences. And then that becomes the question: are we talking about black as the culture, or like you said, black as the race, or genetically? Like those are two totally different things. And are we talking about like the worldwide definition of black? Are we talking about the African diaspora, or are we talking about African Americans specifically? Because them two different cultures. And are we talking about the blacks? Are we talking about niggas? Are we talking about Negroes? There's a Bodiquas. Like there's a range. Like what are we talking about?
YNs.
You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
what generation of blackness are we talking about? And so for me, it's just like well to me when I look at races, I'm looking at okay culturally who do you associate with? You know what I'm saying? And more habit for me than anything, because there's certain things that we like we said, like you said earlier from the Boondocks, like certain things white people shit. It's just like what does that mean? Okay, look, like if you don't know what that means, then you're not a part of the culture that I'm talking about. Because we have a clear understanding of all the things that we have no business doing. And it's not, and then you get into that conversation of, well, why do we feel like we have no business doing those things? Because of history and the different things that either we weren't allowed to do or that was made specifically for us not to be a part of it so people could feel more relevant. And that's a whole other conversation. And it's just like, how have we integrated into those things anyway? And how is it's so much. I don't know. I believe once you get to a certain part of that conversation, you begin to spin circles. And I think that's one of the things why I'm so big on like, bro, we're human. Let's get the human side of it worked out first. If we can find all the touch points there, everything else I think will make a little more sense. But I'm definitely down to have the conversation
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Hey,
because
man.
it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you, man. This was a good talk.
I appreciate you too, boss man. Are we done for today?
Yeah, man.